Hey guys, even though October is over, and even though Halloween is over, I decided to do a little extension of Horror Month because, unfortunately, I did not get a chance to do this video on Halloween, but the video you are about to watch is a retrospective on the Halloween franchise. Now, I did this retrospective as sort of a podcast that I recorded with a few friends of mine. I call it a podcast even though I literally recorded it on my iPhone, and because I recorded it on my iPhone, there are a few audio problems. Like, one of my friends who did the podcast with me is very soft-spoken, and his voice is very low, so I had to raise his volume, so his voice, you can hear it, but his voice is dwarfed by the voices of everybody else in the podcast. And we were recording this in my friend's office, so I had my iPhone sitting on his desk, and there were points where I was moving the iPhone closer to whoever was speaking, but you could hear the sound of me moving the iPhone. That was a fuck-up on my part, but try to bear with me on some of the audio fuck-ups in the video, and I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. But yeah, this video/podcast is a retrospective on the Halloween franchise. Now, I split the podcast into two parts, and the first part of the podcast is me and my friends talking about the first 6 Halloween movies, and after that, part 2 will be me and my friends talking about all the Halloween movies that came after part 6. So once again, I hope you enjoy the video, and I apologize in advance for some of the audio fuck-ups. Hello, Christian Dorer of Canto 1408 here, and I'm doing a retrospective on the Halloween franchise, which is a franchise I technically reviewed before a couple of years ago, but I did a terrible job at that. Joining me for this podcast/video is college professor and author and John Carpenter fan, William Burns.
Hello.
And I'm joined by 2 friends of mine, John, who I went to high school with, and I used to bully a lot, but we've sort of mended our fences a little bit, and Chris.
I watch too many horror movies.
Alright. So let's talk about Halloween, John Carpenter's classic film. Now, I do want to point out that this movie actually kind of got made because of Carpenter's film Assault on Precinct 13. Producer Mustafa Akkad, I'm saying his name right?
Yes.
He saw Assault on Precinct 13 and hired John Carpenter to direct a movie about a serial killer stalking babysitters, but it was Carpenter's idea, I think, to set it on Halloween. The movie is also co-written by Deborah Hill, who is a script supervisor for Assault on Precinct 13, and 2 of the actors from Assault on Precinct 13 were in this movie, Nancy Loomis and Who's the actor who plays Annie's dad in this movie?
Is that
Charles Cypher?
Yes, that's it.
I also think, too, I think that Deborah Hill and Carpenter were dating at the time, too, so there's that connection as well.
I was going to ask, did they have, romantic relations?
I believe so,
Because I know they were business partners, obviously.
Right. At this time, I believe they did have a romantic relationship going on, but I think that kind of broke up by the time The Fog was made.
Okay, I know Carpenter and Adrienne Barbeau were married at one point.
Yeah, I think exactly. I think they met around The Fog, and then they were married by the time Escape from New York was made.
All right, now before I get on to my thoughts on the original Halloween, what is your opinions of the original film?
It's a classic, obviously. I think that, there's really 5 films that really sort of created the template for, the sort of late 20th century, early 21st century horror, right? So it's Night of the Living Dead, Rosemary's Baby, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Exorcist, and Halloween. So you really had in that 10-year period between Night of the Living Dead coming out in 68 and Halloween coming out, which in 78, right? You really have that sort of 10-year period where those 5 films, I think, really set the standard for what horror could be.
I love the atmosphere of it. It was always that kind of slow suspense, and I think that's what Carpenter always did well. Just in terms of how he puts the soundtrack into it, just how he stages it, and a lot of the jump scares are they're still effective even today. Where if you're a horror fan, rarely do you jump in a movie anymore. And still with that movie, there's times where you're like, whoa, you know. I think it's probably the soundtrack that helps with that, because he just kind of knows what is gonna make people freak out. I like the scene, like particularly where he kills Bob. You know, like when he jumps out of that closet, it's like, Jesus.
You know, it's funny. I think that's a really important kill in the film, because one of the sort of the criticisms of the film is this idea that it's very puritanical, that, you know, if a girl has sex in the movie, she's killed, right? But Bob has sex in the movie, and he gets killed. You know, so I think that really sort of, like, that really flies in the face of that. I have a whole theory about that, too.
Well, that's been a stereotype in slasher films, and honestly, that's a myth in most slasher films.
Absolutely.
Like, honestly, it was probably Scream, which I'm not a fan of the Scream movies.
I'm not really either. Yeah.
I love the Scream films. I know that not everyone loves them, but to me, I think it was a decent horror series because of the parody, the tribute. That's just my opinion, though.
I do too. That's a straight 50-50 we got going.
Yeah,
absolutely. All I'm saying is, like, Scream kind of started that stereotype with...
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's earlier than that. I think film critics, looking for some reason to, an additional reason, let's say, to disparage horror movies, picked up on that. Because I remember, I think, like, Siskel and Ebert, like in the early 80s.
The Women in Danger special, I don't know if you ever saw that, but that's where they basically accused all these early 80s slasher films of being misogynistic.
Right.
Which, honestly, I don't know if you guys would agree with me, I find slasher films to be one of the most feminist subgenres of horror. Well, usually you do have a female character who defeats the killer in the end.
And also the films really ask you to identify with that character. It's very rare where they ask you to identify with the killer. It's more that they want you to identify with the what do they call, the final girl? Now they call that, right? Isn't that the trope that they call the final girl?
I do want to correct you on one thing, though. Siskel and Ebert actually really loved Halloween.
They did, absolutely.
But they hated all the knockoffs of Halloween. Right. And I use knockoffs in quotes because some of them had nothing to do with Halloween. Sure. John, what do you think of the original Halloween?
It's my favorite horror film of all time. Oh my god! Like, because I was 11 years old and I was like starting to get into horror films and stuff, but to me, Halloween, that's what did it for me, because every kid is growing up has their own, that one horror film that really spooked them for life and they were not able to sleep at night. That was me. I saw it the first time and oh my god, I couldn't sleep that night when I first saw it. And then years later, as I got older, I started like appreciating more how great of a horror film it is. And also, let's see, what I love about it too is also like Chris said, the music is what made it like scary. Because when I used to hear the soundtrack of Michael Myers, I used to like get like so creepy and frightened. I couldn't even move. It sent chills down my spine.
And I always heard that one of the influences on the soundtrack was Goblin soundtracks, right, for Deep Red and Suspiria. That,
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, that Carpenter really saw how effective the film, I think especially in Suspiria, he saw how effective the scores were for the films, and that's what he wanted to do in his films. Like, especially, like, not so much the theme, but, like, you know, like those I don't know if it's like a bass sting or something goes, boom, like, goes like that. I think that he really got that from the Goblin score, especially from Suspiria.
I can see that. Yeah, when I think about it, yeah.
Now, my opinion on this film, some of you might want to smack me. Like, I do like this film a lot. This is one of my favorite movies. At the same time, I have to be in a very specific mood to watch this movie. And I'll admit, I think I've kind of been spoiled by the slasher films that came afterwards. Like, honestly, I like the Friday the 13th movies better than the Halloween movies. Like, and the thing is, like, you could argue that the original Halloween is a better film than the original Friday the 13th, but I will argue that Friday the 13th had better sequels than Halloween did. I felt like the Halloween, this as a franchise, really started to go downhill after a while, whereas, honestly, I know a lot of people would disagree with me. The Friday the 13th movies, as goofy as they got, there was still something about them, something kind of consistent about them, at least in my opinion.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, like, and honestly, like, I have to be in a specific mood to watch a Halloween movie. I could pop in a Friday the 13th movie almost any time, and maybe it's because the Friday the 13th films are a little more exploitive, I think that kind of appeals to me a little bit more. But I'll admit, I was kind of spoiled by the slasher films that came afterwards.
I think that's an interesting thing to think about because I think one of the things that makes the first Halloween movie such a special film is how invested you get in the characters. So I can see almost like one of the things you said was that you could put on a Friday the 13th movie at any time or catch it at any time. And I think that is because I think in the films that the characters aren't as deeply drawn, or
Maybe
whereas
not.
I think you really sort of feel for the characters in the first Halloween movie, which makes it a little bit harder just to jump in.
Well, I'll disagree with you there because I actually really do like the characters in a lot of the Friday the 13th movies, especially characters like Tommy Jarvis from the later Friday the 13th films. But as far as the characters in this film go, honestly, for me, the most compelling character is Sam Loomis. To me, Sam Loomis is the character who I get invested with the most in this movie. Like the teenage characters, like Annie, Laurie Strode, and what's the name of the character that PJ Souls played?
I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember her name off the top of my head.
I just call her Totally Girl, but
Yes, that right there, like when she says like totally when they're having like random conversations, that kind of like bores me because I really don't care about those conversations they have. Like,
yeah, like that's my point. It's like those characters. Don't get me wrong; they're likable characters, but for me, the Sam Loomis parts of this movie are the most compelling parts. Like you really do get a sense that all these years of studying Michael Myers has really messed with Sam Loomis's head.
Right.
And like I do want to point out how in the film it's left very ambiguous whether Michael Myers is just a psychopath or if there's something supernatural going on.
Right.
And Sam Loomis seems to think that there is something supernatural, but that is very much left open for the viewer's interpretation.
And for me, that was the most frightening. Well, the two things that are most frightening about the film is one, this idea of this unstoppable force, and there's the great scene where and Carpenter just the way he layers the film is just brilliant, right? Where you have Laurie's in class and the teacher's talking about, and it's a fake book, right? It's not like remember, it's like it's in a literature class, and they're talking about some novel, right? About the sort of the personification of fate, which is interesting because that's a fake novel, like that's not a real literature, like Carpenter made that up, or Carpenter or Hill, whoever made that up. But I think it's really interesting because you see Laurie sort of like staring out the window or something, and then in the background of the sound, you could hear this idea that this author, it's a fake author, who that author felt that fate was personified and it was like an element, and that's really what the film's about, right? How sometimes you cannot escape your destiny, right? You have to face up to that destiny, right? To be able to conquer it, right? Is that you have to sort of face up to those things. There are forces that are beyond you, but you have to sort of still have to face those forces, because if you don't, right, you're just going to be trampled by those forces.
Now, I do want to point out, a lot of people call this John Carpenter's masterpiece, and while it is a great film, it's not my go-to Carpenter film. Honestly, like, for me, The Thing is easily Carpenter's masterpiece,
Great
but,
film.
like, when I think Carpenter, I think, like, Assault on Precinct 13, Escape from New York, The Thing, The Fog, Prince of Darkness, They Live. Like, those are my go-to John Carpenter films. Of John Carpenter films, while it's a great film, and I won't deny what this did for Carpenter's career, it's like low on the totem pole for Carpenter films, for me personally.
Well, I think it's the film that really he started putting everything in place.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he like and you can't like I think a huge part of this film, why it's such for me it's such a great film, is Dean Cundey, right? The cinematographer.
Did he do the cinematography for this? I know he did the cinematography for the next two sequels.
Yes, I believe he did. Yeah, I believe he did for the first Halloween. Just the way the camera like glides around and just like
Well, Dean Cundey was a brilliant cinematographer.
Oh, absolutely.
He's the guy who did Jurassic Park. If anybody hasn't heard of him, just look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. He's done a ton of really good stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow, I never would have thought
Yeah,
that.
he did a ton of good stuff. But other things in the film. I mean, I think Deborah Hill's contributions to the film cannot be ignored. I think a lot of times, like, everybody sees this as just like John Carpenter auteur film, but Deborah Hill had a huge part in this film.
Well, I
think Haddonfield, right, is her hometown.
Yes.
And it's funny, like when we go to Monster Mania and we drive through New Jersey, you see the sign for Haddonfield, and that's her hometown. That's Haddonfield, New Jersey. We actually pass by it when you go to if you ever go to the Monster Mania convention in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, you have to pass through Haddonfield, which is actually that's where Deborah Hill came from.
Right.
Yeah, and I do want to point out that Deborah Hill, unfortunately, is no longer with us. She died in, I think, 2005 or 2006.
Cancer? Was it cancer, I think?
I think so.
Cancer,
Yeah.
But I mean, like, when you talk about, like, women's contributions to horror, she had a huge contribution. If you think about it, she really was. She's like an unsung hero of horror.
I actually heard that Deborah Hill actually really did sort of rein in John Carpenter on a lot of things. Like, I I only heard this on a podcast, so I don't know how true this is, but apparently The Thing was going to be much more like a slasher film, and it was really Deborah Hill's idea to make things a little more subtle in The Thing. At least that's what I heard. I don't know how true that is, but I heard she contributed a lot more to Carpenter's films than you might think, especially their earlier films.
Absolutely. I want to go back to a point that Chris made before about the atmosphere of the film, because I really think the atmosphere is wonderful in the film. But one of the things that really bothered me after somebody pointed it out to me is that, you know, it's like, obviously the name of the film is Halloween. You think of like autumn, the fall, kind of like, but the film actually was filmed like, I think in
California.
Yeah, and in the summer.
Yeah.
And if you look in the backgrounds, you see like green trees, like
that
kind of bothers me now when I watch the film, because I want to see like you know like trees that like with different colored leaves on and everything. But when you watch the film and you look in the background, you can see green tree, like you know what I mean. It kind of ruins the atmosphere a little bit for me. You know, somebody pointed that out. Before that, I never noticed it. You know. So sorry to ruin anybody else's.
That's okay. It's all.
That is a good point though, because it's almost like you're turning suburbia into like sort of a hellhole and disintegrate. Because like all this stuff is happening in broad daylight. Like he's stalking Lori the entire
time. Absolutely.
That scene where he sees her, where she sees him and he's like hanging out in between the laundry that she's buying.
Oh, that freaked me out as a kid. I was like, oh my god.
It's creepy as hell, and it's like broad daylight.
Yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. And the other point that you made, Chris, was about that this is one of the first suburban horror movies, right? Prior to this, horror movies took place like in rural areas or in Europe or like these kind of like creepy other destinations, or and then you had something like Rosemary's Baby. You had like where all of a sudden the urban was thing, but this is like one of the first suburban horror films, and I think Carpenter makes a commentary on that, is that people think that suburbia is such a safe place, but the part where when Laurie gets away from Michael Myers and she runs next door to the house, right, and she knocks on the door, right, and the light goes on and you see the person puts the light on and she's screaming, and then the person turns the light out on her. You know what I mean? What a horrible scene that is. Here's this young woman banging on the door asking for help, and the fact that the light goes on is really important because it shows that people are home, right? And you hear her, and then they just turn the light off, right, and just ignore her, So I thought that was a really interesting commentary on suburbia. We think people in suburbia are so nice and it's community and everybody's going to work together and protect each other, and that's not true at all.
You're never safe no matter where you are in life.
Absolutely, yeah.
I do want to point out that Sam Loomis, I know Carpenter originally thought of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, like one of those guys for Sam Loomis. And then I know Christopher Lee later said, I think he said to Deborah Hill, I could be wrong, but somebody who worked on Halloween met Christopher Lee at a party, and Christopher Lee said not working on Halloween, not being in Halloween was the worst mistake of his career.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
And honestly, though, I know so many people see Donald Pleasance so much as Sam Loomis that they can't see anybody else in that role. I agree with that because he does do a great job in the movie, but I actually could see Peter Cushing in the role, though. I think Peter Cushing honestly would have made a great Sam Loomis.
I think that it would have been a very different Sam Loomis, and I think that he would have made Sam Loomis a little bit more compassionate. Because, if you think about the way he did Van Helsing, right, in the Dracula series, and like he made Van Helsing, even though Van Helsing's a man of science, but he's a man of great compassion too. And I think you would have lost that, like you were talking about with Loomis, with Pleasance, is that he's so single-minded. Like you know what I mean? Like in the film, I think that Cushing would have brought a very different approach to it.
Okay.
I think he would have brought a little bit more compassion for Michael Myers as a child or Michael Myers as the person, whereas as Pleasance's Sam Loomis is like, he's evil. He's not a human being anymore. You know what I mean? Treat me, remember, I think like when he's driving up with the nurse, when they're first going to visit Michael Myers, and the nurse is like, you could tell the nurse is almost trying to humanize
Loomis?
Michael Myers.
Oh, Michael Myers, right.
And he's like, no. He's just like, he's basically saying to her, don't be fooled by him. He's not a human being. Give him Thorazine. We got to just sort of wipe him out, wipe out any sort of, human aspect, human traits that he has.
And it's really unique in retrospect because today when you see villains in films, it's always about, all right, you got to know what he's about, why he's doing this, and actually to some degree you want to understand that or even empathize with it. With Michael in that first one, it was just, he's just like a force of nature.
Absolutely.
He's like in the credits they just call him the Shape. Like he's just this guy who's just like coming to take people out.
Absolutely.
It's just
and I often wonder if Carpenter got the idea for that from Black Christmas.
Maybe it
Actually,
could
I
be.
wanted to point out that I'll admit I haven't seen Black Christmas
It's good.
yet,
Check it
but
out.
from everything I've heard about Black Christmas, it seems like that movie had such an influence on this movie. And I do want to point out, a lot of people call this the first slasher film. Honestly, I would say Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or even Psycho could count as a slasher
Yeah.
film.
Psycho, yeah.
Or even a lot of Herschel Gordon Lewis's movies could count as slasher films, honestly. Even some of the Giallo films could count
Yeah,
as slasher
absolutely,
films.
absolutely.
Well, actually, Halloween was like more of like one of the first like horror slashers. Also, the first like film where you had like a super, because in Texas Chainsaw and Black Christmas, the character could die if he had to, but whereas in Halloween,
It was
Michael
one of the
Myers couldn't
first
die.
slasher films where it was very much ambiguous whether this was supernatural or
Right.
just a crazy guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Which is, I think, and that was one of the scariest things about the film, right?
Yes.
Which kind of like, which, you know, once you got into like the later films, they kind of like, that ambiguity is gone, you know, and it becomes a little bit more like your standard kind of, you know, killer or slasher.
The scariest thing to me in Halloween was when you see like Laurie like stab him in the neck or try to like, or when Loomis tries to shoot him. It horrified me as a kid to see like how like no matter how many times you try to kill him, he couldn't die. I'm like, oh my god, he's still out there. He's gonna kill me in my sleep. And
Now,
thing that really like solidified him as a human for me was the bit where he sits up behind Laurie.
Yeah.
And the way he sits up is like
Oh,
so robotic.
it is.
You're just like, there's something off about this guy.
because you're
Like,
saying to
he's
yourself,
definitely
wait,
not
what?
human.
How? Why? I thought he got, you know, you're saying to yourself,
Exactly.
he got stabbed. It's like, how is he still alive? And
And,
Especially
what's
as a little
interesting
kid.
Is, it's like just before that or just after that you see Michael's face.
Yeah,
Yes.
when she pulls the mask off. Yeah, right.
Briefly.
It's like, yeah, he looks human, like he looks fine, and then he puts it back on, and he's just this force again. It's
Yeah,
it's this
absolutely.
weird, like,
That's a good
dichotomy
point.
That happens. Yeah.
I do want to quickly swing this back to the idea of Peter Cushing playing Van Helsing. The idea of Peter Cushing playing Sam Loomis. Do you think, though, that if he did, in retrospect, that would have created an interesting bridge between classic horror films and what horror films eventually morphed into because of Halloween?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can see that. Absolutely.
it would have been interesting to see Cushing as Dr. Loomis. But again, like you said, who else can play Loomis but than Donald Pleasance? And actually, the reason why Cushing turned down Halloween because he was in Star Wars the year before, and he thought that he was like too high of an actor to be in a low budget independent film.
That's interesting.
Any final thoughts on the original Halloween before we move on to the sequels?
Well, I mean, like I said, I still think it's a classic. But again, it's one of those films I think sometimes that, familiarity sometimes breeds contempt. Like, I've seen the film so many times, and I still love it, but I've seen it so many times that I think sometimes I do go to some of the other sequels because I haven't seen them as much, and they're a little bit more fresh for me. But I still think the movie is an absolute classic.
Once again, for me, I have to be in a specific mood to watch the original Halloween. And I will say, one thing I forgot to point out is a lot of people say Friday the 13th took a lot from Halloween, which it did, but honestly, Nightmare on Elm Street took a lot too. But I personally like Nightmare on Elm Street better than Halloween, personally. But that's also, Nightmare on Elm Street is my favorite horror franchise.
Okay.
But, any closing thoughts on the original Halloween from you guys?
Like I said, once a year, I always try to, even if it's not on Halloween, I just watch it just for myself, for the fun of it, and I own all the sequels. I've seen them so many times as sequels. I have like a clear, like, photographic in my head, like what happens after that, because like I said, big fan. I love this, and the sequels, some of them were hit or miss. Some of them I liked, some I didn't like, and because my favorite, actually, I'll get to that later, what my favorite sequel was in the franchise, and
All right.
that's about it. Go on, Chris.
For me, I think it's something that's just really remarkable about it is its simplicity. It's kind of just like straightforward. Like, all right, there's this guy killing babysitters, and it just bounces off of that for an entire movie. Whereas like most other movies would have gotten boring like halfway through. This just kind of stays so interesting. So you kind of invested for the whole time. And I think it's mostly, I guess you can contribute it to Carpenter, but it's more just how it all came together. It was just a really smart, well-made horror film.
Now let's move on to Halloween 2, which came out in 1981, and I'll admit I actually saw this before I saw the first Halloween movie, which maybe that's why as I said before, I was kind of spoiled by a lot of later slasher films before I saw the original Halloween. But Halloween 2, I actually think is a pretty decent follow-up to the first one. It's definitely a lot more in tone with a lot of the slasher films that were coming out in the early 80s, like Friday the 13th, My Bloody Valentine, The Burning. Like, it's very much in the same tone as those movies. Like, it's a lot more exploitive, it's a little bit more gory, and I want to point out that Yeah, Carpenter and Deborah Hill did write the screenplay for this, but this time it's directed by Rick Rosenthal.
Rosenthal.
Yeah. So what do you guys think of Halloween 2?
Well, it's funny because you were talking about the more exploitive things. Because I always heard that sort of Rosenthal's original cut wasn't that gory, right? And then, but Carpenter was worried that it wouldn't play or it wouldn't be successful because he was the producer of it. So he actually reshot some of the scenes, right?
He
and
did.
they redid some of the sequencing of the scenes, you know. Yeah, actually.
Rosenthal was also upset about that.
Yeah, very much so, yeah. And I think that's actually two cuts, right? There's the TV cut, which is actually closer to Rosenthal's cut, and then there's the theatrical cut with the reshoots from Carpenter. But I actually remember when this movie came out when I was a kid, and I couldn't see it. I was too young, and my uncle saw it. I remember like begging my uncle to tell me like the whole story, like so my uncle had to like recount like the whole thing to me. But I like it too. I mean, I don't think it's close to the original, but I like it. What I love about it is that it happens like, and it's very rare for a sequel to start like minutes after the original.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, that's what I thought it was cool. Like, it really kept that whole feeling. And I think Rosenthal really kept up some of that atmosphere from the first film. I really think there's a good there's a good sort of continuity between the two films. And I think the film, like I said, I think because of the characters. I think the characters in the first film are more compelling than the characters in the second film.
Mm-hmm. True, but also some of the characters here, and this is why the Friday the 13th movies really appeal to me, is you sometimes have, like, one character who's, like, really kind of sleazy, like that one male nurse.
Yeah, he's the ambulance driver.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Bud. He's such a dirtbag.
I know.
I can't stand him. Yeah.
But I kind of like, I don't like that character, but, like, that you've seen characters like that a lot in early 80s slasher
films. And what's interesting is that he plays a dirtbag. If you ever see the movie River's Edge.
I never saw it.
Oh, that's a great movie.
Yeah, he plays Keanu Reeves' stepfather, who's like a real dirtbag in that movie. He must have that was his role, like to play dirtbags like in films.
I never even heard or saw this. I have to check this out.
It's a great
River's
movie,
Edge.
River's
Tim
Edge.
Hunter directed
was
it.
Keanu Reeves like a young kid, like not known? Okay, well,
yeah, Crispin Glover's in it. Dennis Hopper's.
I
in it.
gotta watch it. Then. Gotta check it out. I love
but the same guy who's I think his name is Bud, right? In Halloween 2, he plays another kind of like sleazy dude.
Right.
I do want to point out Lance Guest in this movie as this young ambulance driver who starts to develop a thing for Laurie. And I do want to point...
Right? Jimmy is his
Yeah, that was his name.
Jimmy,
and I do want to point out that that this is where it's revealed that Laurie Strode is Michael Myers' sister. Mm-hmm. What do you guys think of that twist? Because obviously it's a twist that the sequels really ran with. And I like it. At the same time, in a way, it almost cheapens the original. It kind of makes the whole point of Michael Myers being something random kind of pointless in the first one. But what do you think of the twist?
There's no denying that it does kind of bring... It takes away a lot of the ambiguity, admittedly. But in terms of... I don't know why, but it just... In my head, it just occurred. It kind of goes to Star Wars.
Well,
you find out that the big villain is actually your lead person's relative.
Right.
It kind of does, but at the same time, there was actually a little bit of an interview I watched with Carpenter on the H2O DVD back when I was in high school. He said that when he wrote Halloween 2, he said that he was like late at night having a 6-pack of can of beers. And he had no idea. Like he said, he had nothing else to do for the sequel. He thought, I'll make her sister. That's as best as I can do. So basically, it was lazy writing in some ways.
Yeah.
I
mean, I agree with what's been said. I think it was kind of a cop out, But that scene where they go to the classroom, that's like a really creepy scene. Yeah. And he writes Sam Hain or Samhain or whatever how you say it.
Right.
He writes it in blood on the thing and like the knife in the picture of the family of the sister or whatever like that. Like that's one of the more creepier scenes in the film.
Yeah.
So like I kind of like I can understand it. It is kind of a cop out in some ways like that. But I'm trying to remember now because when Halloween when the original Halloween came on TV. Carpenter had to film extra scenes
I saw
for
those.
it, right? To sort of pad it out because I guess they cut out some stuff of it. And I could have sworn that in one of those extra scenes, it's kind of alluded to the fact that Laurie is his sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she has these flashbacks about meeting a boy in an asylum when she was
right.
Yes.
I can't remember. But I thought. But anyway, so they, I think there was some connection between the two, but I think it didn't become explicit until the second film.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and that's a great speech that remember after when they're talking about and this goes back to like why Michael Myers is doing what he's doing. Remember Sam Loomis has that great when they're in the car with the state trooper and the woman from the state, and he has that whole thing about sort of he talks about Halloween and he talks about the darkness in ourselves and our unconscious mind. Like that's such a great speech like he
Yeah.
gives, and I think that's really, I mean, if you're looking for the real reason why Michael Myers is doing what he's doing, it's contained in that speech rather than that it's his sister trying to get rid of his sisters and everything like that.
To kind of extrapolate on that, I think there was a novelization of Halloween that was written once, and there was this whole almost like portentous prologue that was about like an old
Celtic, an old Celtic.
I
yeah,
have
heard
that.
about that.
I have that novelization actually. I still need to read it, but I think that's where Halloween 6 got a lot of its inspiration
Yeah.
from.
Yes.
Was
And it was Dennis Etchinson, I believe, who wrote it. Right?
no, it
What's
was
his name?
Curtis.
Well, that was a pen name for Dennis Etchinson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they actually went to him later on to write one of the later sequels, but I guess Mustafa Khad rejected it because he thought it was too cerebral.
Okay.
But in the one of the later, I might have been for Halloween 4.
I know what it is. I'm going to bring that up when we get to
Is
that.
but he was going to build on, because he wrote the original novelization and added that part in. He was going to build on that in a later screenplay, but it was rejected as an idea. But it was an interesting thing because, like, again, why would he put Samhain on the? Why would he write that? This ancient Celtic word on the wall. You know what I mean? So I think that would have been a really interesting direction.
definitely. I mean,
Which they
that
could have
could've
really started in the second movie with him putting that on the, writing that on. Remember, because nobody knows what it means, and it's actually Loomis who explains what that what that means, what that festival was.
And as much as the ambiguity is gone, I do like that because that's like the one time that we get sort of from Michael himself is we get like some sort of motivation.
Absolutely.
It is a cool moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
I do want to point out that there's sort of a running joke in the movie where Night of the Living Dead is playing in the background. I always found that to be really funny.
Kinda.
And then they kind of winked at it in Season of the Witch because they have Halloween 1 playing on.
Yeah, right. The kind of same kind of thing. Absolutely.
And speaking of Season of the Witch, let's talk about that one. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch,
There we
which
go.
I know you, Bill, you and me love this movie.
We do, yeah,
Honestly,
I do.
this is my favorite film of the franchise. I don't
Interesting.
care that Michael Myers isn't in it. This is my personal favorite of the franchise. But
That's a bold declaration right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
but John and Chris, why don't you interject your opinions of it?
Let Chris go first because I haven't seen 3 since high school. It's been a while, so go on, Chris.
I remember because I marathoned these movies on Halloween with a friend of mine once, and when we got to 3, we were in this great place where we weren't quite sure what was going on because we realized like 15 minutes in, okay, Michael's not in this one. So I started realizing, okay, so I guess this is like an anthology one. They just like took a break, did something different, and it's great if you kind of go into it not knowing what to expect because you're holding it to the standards that the first 2 had, and this is like a completely different thing. So for me, I really liked it for that because it was something totally different. It was something brand new, and it tells a pretty cool story.
All right, John, your opinions of Halloween 3?
All right, I mean, I don't think it's not really a terrible film. Like I said, I just wish that I remember watching as a teenager where I was starting to get into all the Halloween films. When I was starting to get into horror films, I was having a marathon of all, and that I just was like confused, like where the heck is Michael Myers? And then once I like read and looked into it that they wanted to kill him off in 2 and just start a new anthology to it, which I mean that's somewhat interesting. They were trying to make like a Twilight Zone or Tales from the Crypt kind of thing, which is interesting. But
And honestly, not to cut you off, honestly, I think in today's day and age, with American Horror Story being
Right.
so popular,
That's
I
true.
think something like an anthology Halloween series probably could have worked in today's day and age, but maybe
True.
this was just a little
Actually, do people just
ahead
hear
of its time.
that I heard a rumor that Carpenter's working on a TV show
Yes.
called Tales of Halloween Night.
I heard that too.
And it's going to be a sort of that's what I heard. I heard that
It's
Carpenter's.
supposed to be. He's been doing these comic books called Tales from Halloween Night, and then I think there's another one called Tales from Science Fiction. These are like 2 sort of companion pieces to each other, and I think it's going to be based off that.
Oh, that'd be great.
I read
That'd
some
be really
issues
good.
of it. It's pretty good.
Okay, yeah. Well, anything, if he's involved in anything, it's going to be interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. I
But
agree.
but it's funny, like that never bothered me about the film that there's no Michael Myers in it. Like that didn't bother
I
me
envy
at
you for
all.
that.
It
You know
didn't
what I
bother
mean?
me either. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just
like,
surprised by it.
and here's the thing, this is actually my dad's favorite Halloween movie. This is actually one of his favorites, and I remember he told me that, oh yeah, the third one has nothing to do with Michael Myers, and so I guess I was prepared for that when I first saw it, and for me, I think the reason why this is my favorite Halloween movie is just because in this movie you feel the holiday of Halloween.
I've heard that before.
Yeah,
That's
like
an interesting analogy.
in the first two movies, honestly, they could have been set any time of the year. This
True.
movie has to take place on
That's a good
Halloween.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially since the masks are so integral.
Yeah,
to it,
absolutely.
The costumes themselves. Like,
And I love Connell Cochran's speech about what Halloween really is and like what I think that's one of my not only like one of my favorite speeches from like a horror film, it's one of my favorite speeches from like any film.
Gotcha.
Like that is so creepy the way he explains it, and like it's great.
he was having fun with that role.
Oh my god, he was great. He's just so good in it.
And I just want to point out that so many people criticize this movie for not having Michael Myers in it, and I can understand being a little disappointed, but I've rarely heard a criticism leveled against this movie that's not about not having Michael Myers in it. Like, criticize the movie for a legit reason. Like, okay, maybe you don't like the story, maybe the acting doesn't work for you.
True.
Stop saying it's a bad movie just because Michael Myers isn't in it. That shouldn't be a deal breaker. Is it a good movie on its own? And I do want to ask you guys, sorry to cut you off, but do you think this movie would have worked and been more successful if it wasn't promoted as a Halloween sequel?
That's exactly what I was about to say. I'm wondering if this movie had just been called Season of the Witch.
Yeah.
If it would have had, I don't know. I'm not really sure, And again, I agree with you. I think that is such a lame criticism just because a character is in it. Like you said, the story is fantastic. Like it's like, and the story is very interesting. It's very a different take on a lot of these mythos and things.
And it's kind of like a lot of people really hate Friday the 13th Part 5, which is one of the Friday the 13th sequels where Jason's not the killer. And a lot of people hate it for that reason. And I'm like, are we forgetting that Jason wasn't the killer in the first one?
Yeah,
That's
very
true.
true.
Sorry to go on a tangent that's not related to Halloween for this one, but that one's cool because at least they tried something different. Because it was more about Tommy's like psychological place in Halloween, which I thought was really interesting.
I didn't see that coming in, like, it was Part 5, you said?
Yeah, Part 5.
When I first saw Part 5, I did not see that coming that Jason was not the killer. I thought, like, Jason, like, maybe, like, came back or something. They don't explain it, but... Yeah.
Now, I do want to point out that in the credits for the movie, it says written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, but the original screenplay was written by Nigel Neal, who also wrote the Quatermass movies. And I know Nigel Neal asked to have his name taken off of it. Now, you might know more about that.
Well, because of the violence. Because I think that what happened was Neal's. If you know anything about Nigel Neal, a lot of his work is very much psychological
and very cerebral.
Very cerebral, right? So I guess what happened was when he saw that there were these there's some brutal kills in this movie, you know what I mean, in this film. I think that's when he decided he wanted to take his name off it. But the film still is so Neal-esque. Yeah. I mean, any movie where you have like a ring of computers around Stonehenge, a stone from Stonehenge, that's like Nigel Neal right there.
Oh yeah, I saw
the ancient and the modern, right? That's what he talks about, how they sort of infuse into each other.
Yeah, I saw a lot of the fourth Quatermass serial in this, and also I saw some elements of the second Quatermass serial, like the whole idea of a corporation, and even some stuff from the third, because in the third Quatermass movie, he kind of gives this idea that the mystical and the scientific are closer than you think.
What about the Stone Tape?
Stone Tape?
I mean, this movie is very much like the Stone Tape. The idea that stones and sort of elemental things hold these kind of powers in them, and they So I think the film, even though Nigel Neal took his name off it, it's still
his
very
fingerprints
Neal.
are all over this movie.
Absolutely.
I'm half expecting Bernard Quatermass to show up in this. Like,
absolutely.
What are we gonna do about Colonel Cochran?
No, absolutely.
But I really, really love this one. I think it has a really interesting story, and once again, that goes to Nigel Neal. But I heard that Nigel Neal wanted this to be a little more satirical, and I think one of the reasons he took his name off of it was because he felt Carpenter and Tommy Lee Wallace were making it too serious. But there's still some of that dark humor.
No, absolutely. I mean, Connell Cochran, the character. I mean, if you think about it, the movie really is a critique of the commercialization of Halloween, the holiday. That's really what the movie's about, right? I mean, one of the things Connell Cochran hates is that they've turned Halloween into this funny, jokey, kind of commercial kind of thing, and he wants to return it to its sacrificial, kind of dark gods, kind of
At the same time, he even says, "Oh, it's just a practical joke."
Right.
And Connell Cochran is one of the most evil freaking villains ever. He's gonna kill every child in America. I'm sorry. I would rather deal with Michael Myers than Connell Cochran. Connell Cochran is pure evil.
No,
At least Michael Myers, you could make the argument, okay, he's psychologically scarred or he's possessed. With Connell Cochran, no, he's a scumbag.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I want to talk about Tom Atkins' character.
Oh, I loved Tom Atkins.
Me too. I think he's such a dirtbag in the movie. He's supposed to be the hero. Like he always wants to drink. Remember, he's always saying, "I need a drink. Let's go get a drink." I
haven't seen this film in so long. I'm like, after having this conversation, I'm like interested now to watch the film and maybe rethink this film that I did.
And also the way he treats women in the film, he slaps the nurse's ass in the beginning,
and he's always saying his reward if they do things for him. He's like, I'll take you out to dinner. I'll marry you and stuff like that. But my favorite part of the whole movie, my favorite part of the whole movie is a part with him and Stacey Nelkin, right, are in, and she's like so much younger than him. He's such like they're in the hotel room and they're having sex, and then in the room next to them is the woman who's fiddling around with the microchip that's from the mask, and she gets zapped in the face, and you hear this noise like boom, like this big noise, and then Stacey Nelkin is like, she's like, what's that noise? And he's like, and then Tom Atkins is like, who cares? And he just grabs her and rolls over on her in the bed. I'm like, yeah, there's our hero, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, there's our hero.
I want to point out his character also, when he starts having sex with Stacey Nelkin's character, it's not till halfway through when he asks how old she is.
Yeah, absolutely. He's such a dirtbag in the movie.
But yet, I still really liked his character.
I do too. He's likable. He's a very likable character.
Yeah, and that, honestly, I know Tommy Lee Wallace directed it, and I'm not trying to take anything from Wallace, but I would not be surprised if Carpenter maybe ghost-directed some of this, because so many of the shots in this movie are so Carpenter-esque, in my opinion. And
I think the one that really stands out in my mind is Atkins is on the outside of the facility, trying to see in, and there's one scene where he looks up into a window and a light shines in his face.
Oh, right,
Carpenter music just swells up. That's the most Carpenter moment in the whole thing.
Well, and it's interesting that Carpenter. I think actually out of all out of the Halloween films, Halloween 3 has the best score.
I agree.
Carpenter and Alan Howarth did a really great job on the score in this.
I want to point out that, have you ever seen the trailer for Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive?
I don't think I have.
The trailer for that uses the same music from Halloween 3.
Is that the one where he's talking to the camera?
Yes.
And he's saying,
I'm gonna skip
the hell out of you.
Yeah.
I think this is the last time Carpenter, maybe Deborah Hill, was this is the last time they were involved in a Halloween series franchise. Then after they just went their own separate ways.
I heard that he was because I guess we'll talk about this when we get to the later Halloween ones. But one of the ones, what was the one? The one was where was that Halloween? Is that H2O, Halloween Resurrection?
No, H2O. He was offered to direct that, but he said no.
Yeah, well, he wanted too much money.
That's exactly. That's
so.
Why.
But I mean, but again, this is the last film I think he scored.
Yeah.
Right, and the score for this is one of my favorite scores from him. When I went when I remember trying to find this soundtrack when I was younger. It was so hard to find, and eventually being able to find it. But I think it's been reissued now on vinyl and stuff like that. But it's such a great score, But it's funny about you said that, because I actually met Tommy Lee Wallace at a convention, and nobody was around him, so I got to talk to him. I got his autograph, I paid and everything,
Nice guy.
Yeah, very nice. He just and we talked about Halloween 3.
I want to point out he was actually married to Nancy Loomis, who played Annie for a little bit.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And he told me when we were there that he was actually offered the chance to direct Halloween 2. But he actually turned it down because he knew that Carpenter had done such a great job that no matter who was going to direct Halloween 2, it was going to be, it was going to be unfavorably compared. But that's why he was interested in doing 3, because it was a totally different story. Mm-hmm. He's hoping that people wouldn't compare it to the first movie. But he was actually offered the chance to direct Halloween 2.
I always find it interesting how when you have a director not to get off topic or anything, how Lucas, he did the first Star Wars film, then after that he just produced and wrote the rest of it. It's why would you want somebody to else take over your vision, and where where you feel you want full control of it?
Right, which is interesting because you think that because Carpenter almost wanted to have his cake and eat it too, right? Because he didn't want to do a Halloween 2 because he knew that it would not be as good as the original one.
True.
Yet he came in and did reshoots. So it's almost like he wanted his cake and eat it too. I'm not going to direct this, but I am going to do a couple of reshoots and do what I really want to do with this film. You know what I mean? It's
polish it.
Yeah, right.
I want to point out. I want to point out that I actually met Stacey Nelkin at the convention that your friends do.
Yeah,
and
the Macabre Film Festival. Yeah,
very nice woman, and she was asking me all these questions, oh, where do you go to school? And she couldn't have been nicer, and she signed my copy of Halloween 3, and she even said Tom Atkins does these conventions too. Like, she was very, very cool. I liked her a lot.
And she's great in the film. Like, she's awesome in the film. She's very believable and she's very sympathetic. But I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie Manhattan.
I did with
Woody Allen.
Yes, that's
and in the movie, I guess it's loosely based on that Woody Allen had a relationship with a much younger woman.
Yes,
and it's come out since then that it was actually Stacey Nelkin. That Woody Allen had when she was much younger, that they had a relationship. That's who it was.
When you think about it with Manhattan, there's a little bit foreshadowing. It makes you think how he married like a very young girl.
Right, absolutely.
Sue-Mi, who's now his stepdaughter/wife.
Right, absolutely.
Creepy.
Yeah.
And then she kills it in that scene where you find out she's been a robot since.
I actually want to point out there does seem to be an influence of Invasion of the Body Snatchers on this.
I've never seen that. I have to watch that.
Right, because isn't the name of the town the same name? Santa Mira is the same name of the town in Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah, and even the ending's very Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yes, with him screaming, "Stop it! Stop it!"
Like, we didn't win,
Yeah, right. Absolutely,
and it's also such a nihilistic ending. Mm-hmm. The world basically ends at the end of the movie. Right. Like, Conal Cochran destroys the world, or at least.
Like Conal Cochran says, one of his great things in speeches, he's like, when you wake up tomorrow, the world's going to be a very different place.
And honestly,
that's such an understated thing to say.
Honestly, I would love to see a follow-up to this about what happened to the world after that, but at the same time, that might destroy some of the ambiguity of it, too.
True. I mean, but in this day and age, like, everything is, like, getting, like, a comic book continuation now.
I agree with you on that, Chris.
Yeah, no, that might be interesting. Like, a comic book continuation might be very interesting.
And maybe one day we could see Michael Myers fight Conal Cochran.
Yeah. That'd be actually pretty awesome and epic, like, really awesome.
All right. Let's move on now to Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Now, they decided to bring Michael Myers back because Halloween 3 did not do well at all. And I want to point out, and you were alluding to this earlier, that originally what they wanted to do was have it be like the ghost of Michael Myers coming back, but... Of course, that's very similar, like Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff like that. But originally, Michael Myers was going to outright be a ghost in this one. But they scrapped it and went for more like, okay, he somehow survived being blown up in part 2. And now in this one, he escapes from the hospital he's held at. And Sam Loomis is still alive, even though he was like right there when it exploded.
You just got a boo-boo.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a comment about that because remember how in the ending of Halloween 2 when like the hospital blows up and it makes you wonder like, okay, Mike, you can see Michael survive. It makes you wonder how did that was always something that always like fascinating and like always questioned me about before, like how did Loomis survive? Not that I'm saying I was glad he's come. I was thrilled that he came back with 4, but at the same time,
he also was stabbed in the stomach, right? Wasn't he also stabbed in the stomach too? Yeah, man, he's an indestructible dude.
And I want to point out, Michael Myers got his eyes shot out.
Yes, that's true.
Now, when I was a little kid watching this movie, I just assumed, okay, Michael Myers is supernatural. Maybe he has regenerated. Yeah, but I used to love this one as a little kid growing up, and I still appreciate it. But honestly, as I've gotten older, my opinions of it have kind of declined. I don't think it's a bad one. I think it's a decent follow-up to Halloween 1 and 2. And I think Danielle Harris, especially for how young she is, does an amazing job as Jamie in this movie. But the movie overall, I think, is one of the weaker Halloween movies.
Well, I was a teenager when the movie came out, and I was a huge horror fan, a huge Halloween fan, so I could not wait to see this movie. I was so excited to see it. I remember seeing it, I remember going in, I remember the opening credit sequence is really great. It's a very moody, atmospheric, these these shots of the field and the harvest and stuff like that, so I was like, oh man, this is going to be great. And I was disappointed in it, but I didn't hate it, put it that way. Like, I did think they did some interesting things, like you said, with Danielle Harris's character. So they did do some interesting things, but I think a lot of it did fall back into that kind of slasher trope, which kind of disappointed me because so much of the original Halloween was about not doing that. You know what I mean? Doing something, or even doing something different. And
well, you gotta understand the original Halloween did come out before the slasher tropes were really a thing.
Sure.
Yeah. What are your guys' opinions of Halloween 4?
Me, I think it actually holds up pretty well, at least for me personally. Because I remember watching it the morning after Halloween, after I just had marathon the first 3 the night before. And I don't know what it is. You brought up the opening credit sequence. From that to the scene where Loomis confronts him at the gas station. I don't know. It just strikes me. It had a very Empire Strikes Back feel, almost.
All right.
Which is kind of a weird comparison. Sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
Yeah, it was something about his Okay, like it's back, like it's crazy, you know, like Michael is like in his prime again.
I do want to point out,
Loomis is
though, that
after
Sam
him.
Loomis, he kind of just, his dialogue in the movie is just sort of a repeat of everything he said in the first
Yeah, a
movie,
little
kind
bit.
of.
But I would argue like he has more gravitas this time around because he's scarred. He's got
Yes.
like he knows like shit is gonna go down, especially after what happened in '78, and on top of that, like you know he's his hatred for Michael, I think, or at least like his need to stop Michael is even more passionate. So
I think 4 is a pretty. I mean, I don't think it's not the best sequel, but I think it's a pretty like decent, like, you know, great follow up. And yes, I love Danielle Harris as Jamie Lloyd. She was excellent. She was like a character you really felt for. You like really like rooted for her to like to survive Michael Myers trying to attack her.
Yeah.
And I also like Ellie Conroy as Rachel. She was like really very. She wasn't your stereotypical like, you know, like damsel in distress girl. She was really like, you know, working hard to save Jamie from being killed by Michael.
And I want to point out that Jamie is supposed to be Laurie Strode's daughter, and you find out in this movie that Laurie Strode was killed in a car accident between this and part 2. But of course, they retcon that later. But we'll get to that.
Well,
it's
was-
easier
was-
by the time H2O.
Yeah, was Lance Guest's character the father of it? I don't know.
They don't explain that. There's
I've always assumed that. I've always
That's what I
assumed
assumed,
that
too.
he was the father of
Right,
Jamie,
right.
and I think they both because they say in the movie both her mother and father were
Right.
killed in a car
Right, right.
accident.
I just realized something. I think maybe Jamie Lloyd could be named Jamie Lee Curtis, but because Jamie Lee Curtis at that time was already a star, she was
Right.
not interested in coming back because she was doing Trading Places, Fish Called Wanda.
Right,
she was
right.
she was a hit.
Right,
she was
right.
not interested in coming back to the franchise anymore
Right.
at that time.
And I think the ending is great.
Yes.
The ending is really cool. Ending.
I did not see
the
that
ending is
coming. I
really
was
good.
like,
yeah,
whoa,
I like
what?
the ending.
I remember as a little kid watching the movie, that really kind of freaked me the fuck out.
I actually agree with you on that. I felt the same way because when I saw that, I did not see it come because when you see Michael is dead, you think that's going to be a happy ending, but no, it's supposedly like she has the curse inside of her.
And go back to Loomis, I mean, like he just falls to pieces in that last.
Right,
Yeah,
that's
right.
awesome
It's
scene,
never
yeah.
gonna stop.
Actually,
Like,
I met what's her name? Danielle Harris at a convention, Monster Mania, the first time we went. Very nice girl.
I met her too. Yeah.
And I asked her like, what happened to like, you know, why you were not going to be the killer in 5, and she said it just didn't happen. It was just one of those things that went through so many rewrites. She thought that was the thing for Halloween 5.
maybe it was a thing where like obviously what happened with like Friday the 13th, they went with one movie where Jason wasn't the killer. Maybe
Yeah.
they kind of just thought like, look, we can't do this without Michael again.
Yeah. I guess
that makes a lot of sense.
Season of the Witch, and it didn't work. But
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen a movie.
I would have loved.
Yeah, right,
I
absolutely.
would have loved to see her as the
See
killer.
like this little girl going around like stabbing people. It would have been
Right.
a really like disturbing, really different kind of movie.
She would have been the passing killer to Michael in that film.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to what I think is definitely one of the worst Halloween movies, Halloween 5: The Revenge of Michael Myers.
I have some mixed feelings about. I admit it's not great or perfect. It's not like, I mean, there were some parts I did like about it, and let's see. I liked how, again, it was a flop, but the problem was they really rushed it too quickly because 4 was a hit, and they were like rushing too quickly. They should have waited for at least maybe a year or 2 for it to come out, but again, they were just so like, you know, happy that the 4 was a big hit. They wanted to make another one as soon as possible. They think that this film could have been a lot better than it was. Like, oh, but here's one thing I did not like about it. They killed off Rachel. When I saw
Yeah,
him, like,
yeah.
I'm like, you gotta be kidding me.
She wanted to be killed off.
She
though.
did, but the same, I was still upset that they killed her off because she was my favorite character in the 4th film.
I
Well, one of my
agree.
favorite
Yeah,
characters.
It sucks that she dies. I think
Yeah,
like
then
a third of the way through.
These other characters they have, they were like pointless.
Like you had these two lame cops.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
the first
yeah.
time you see them, you hear duck noises as
Yes.
they're walking.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, was
Yeah.
this supposed to be like comedy relief or something like that?
I
Like,
think
that's-
the director took
odd,
them
yeah.
from the two lame cops from Last House on the Left.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I didn't see that one either.
Yeah. And this is the one with Thorn, right? Was this the
Yeah,
one
this
with
was the
Thorn?
beginning of
Right,
the Thorn
okay.
curse.
Another
thing.
thing too, like I also asked her what was that guy in the black suit. She said she did never do this day.
She didn't know.
No,
Well, they explain that in part 6.
they
so.
do.
Right,
but
right,
anyway,
yeah.
we'll get to that later.
It's
Yeah.
it's a cool twist, but it's a little bit of a letdown.
Yeah, kinda.
Yeah.
For me, yeah, I'd say Jamie is what holds it together. Like she's still a great character.
I agree.
Invested in it, despite how the 4th one ended. But on top of that, it's there's all these like weird like continuity flows between the other ones. Like,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, the Myers house is a mansion.
Actually, I have a fact
The
about
mask
that.
looks like shit. Like it's it's very all over the place.
Supposedly they say that was the same house as the Munsters, but there's not really much clear evidence of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think it doesn't. No, it doesn't look anything like the house
They're
of the
probably
Munsters.
screwing around like it's so big now. It's the Monsters house.
Yeah, that could be a reason. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to point out that the guy who directed this also co-directed Omen 4. And if you've been watching my YouTube videos, I just reviewed all the Omen movies, and I went on a big-ass rant on Omen 4.
I have to check that out.
Yeah, but Yeah, this is a bad one.
agree.
I liked it as a little kid because I remember AMC used to play this and Halloween 4 all the time, and I saw this right after Halloween 4, and as a little kid I loved it. As an adult, yeah, I think it's pretty shitty. It's like
I give it one saving grace. The scene, the barn scene where he takes them out with
Yes.
the haymaker thing.
Mm-hmm.
That for me, like that's a really good slasher movie scene,
Yeah.
just in terms of like how it's like done. But beyond that, it's not. Yeah, there's not a lot going on.
I do want to point out there is one scene that I'm not sure how I feel about, but I get what they were trying to go for. There's a scene in the movie where Michael almost stops himself from killing Jamie, and like he takes off his
Yes.
mask in front of her, and you really do get a sense there's something else here. Like he doesn't want to be doing.
Is that the
this.
scene when he calls her
Uncle,
she
yes.
calls Uncle Boogeyman or something like that?
No,
Or is that the
no,
wrong-
that-
Just Uncle.
Okay.
Yeah, that was.
You haven't seen this in a long time, have you?
Yeah.
I just remember in that scene you see a tear come down Michael
Yes.
Myers' face,
Yeah.
but I guess that could have been a really emotional moment.
It could have been.
But I do want to point out in this movie they make Sam Loomis an asshole.
A little bit.
I actually kind of hated Sam Loomis in this
Which,
movie.
I mean, given like what he's been through at this point, I guess
True.
you can understand. Kind of like we'll get to that later. The second zombie Halloween. I mean, that was another movie where Loomis.
Well, that's a different
Yeah.
That's a
continuity
different
too.
story.
Yeah.
It's a different universe. All right.
But any closing thoughts on Halloween 5?
No, I think you guys covered it. I really don't have anything else.
Here's another part. Actually, there was another part I did like when, like towards like the end of it, when like Loomis, like you said, is going like like crazy and stuff, and you see like Jamie like climbing up the like or like when Loomis is like beating the heck out of Michael when he has like the chains, and I actually like that scene. That's okay because after everything he's been through, he's just like so what's the word trying to think what's the word like
Was like so just so frustrated.
frustrated at
Right.
everything what's happened like from Laurie to Jamie.
Right.
It's you really like you're like yes beat him to death.
But I remember at the very end they arrest Michael Myers
They did.
and don't even take his mask off.
No.
It's like, okay.
I, think,
Yeah, right,
I
so
have a theory about that. I think the reason why because I think if you like took his mask off, he'll like really get upset. Because like I feel like when you think about it, some like mental patients have like a OCD about something. Like
Right.
if you take it away from them, they're gonna get really mad and upset. They're not gonna like calm down until you give it back to them.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you can tell, this is a pretty bad one.
Oh yeah, it's not. Like I said, I don't think it's not the worst one, but it's got its flaws. It's not perfect. It's not great. It's not a good one. I agree.
Yeah.
So now let's move on to Halloween 6,
Another
The
one I
Curse
know.
of Michael Myers, which there are two cuts of this movie, the theatrical cut and the producer's cut. I'll admit, this is a bad one, but it's kind of a guilty pleasure
Right.
for me. But the producer's cut is actually a lot better. Granted, I've only seen the producer's cut once, but the producer's cut fills in a lot of plot holes, and it's actually a much better movie. But I would say both cuts of the movie, it's not a great movie. But
No.
apparently the script for this was really good because I heard Donald Pleasance didn't even want to come back, but apparently he really, really liked the script, but the director or the producer or somebody just completely fucked the script up.
Who directed 6 again? I don't remember the guy's name.
Joe Chappelle, he
Thanks.
also co-directed Hellraiser 4. And
Sorry. Also, even in like when you said like Donald Pleasance did not want to come back, even Danielle Harris, she said that when I asked her like why you didn't come back for 6, she said she hated the script. She did not like the way the direction went with her character, which is understandable. What?
I think she flat out said like she didn't want to get killed off.
She didn't want to
Right,
be
right,
killed
and
off,
they
which,
kill her off, right?
which I have to admit, that's one flaw I can point out. Like about 6, they
Right.
killed off Jamie Lee like 5 minutes in the film.
Yeah.
well, in the producer's cut, she dies later on
Yes,
and dies
yes.
much
Right.
differently in the producer's
I'll take
cut.
your word for it. It's been a while since I've seen the producer's cut.
But this is the one where it goes outright, yeah, it's supernatural, where they say, okay, Michael Myers was possessed by the demon Thorn or something,
Yeah.
and there's this whole cult in the movie who, as it turns out, were actually manipulating Michael Myers this whole time, and we're using Michael Myers as sort of a puppet. And I'm just thinking, they missed a major opportunity to have Conal Cochran be in this movie.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. That would have been great. Yeah.
Like,
Could've
actually
been-
bridge the continuities.
That would have been great. You're right.
Even though that
absolutely.
wouldn't make much sense because Halloween 3 ended with the world
Right,
ending,
right.
but
That
I
would
don't
have
know.
been cool. It would have been a good callback. You know what I mean? That would have been cool. I think people would have.
Yeah.
I think fans would have enjoyed it.
But what do you think of Halloween 6?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's got some interesting. The ending, another movie where they did try to sort of do some different things in there with the baby and like
Yeah.
the cult and everything, which I usually really love. But again, I just didn't. It was such such a different sensibility than the first movie. You know what I mean? When you really look at the first Halloween to this movie, it's such different sensibilities about what horror is and sort of what's scary and things like that. So I really think in some ways it betrayed some of the earlier kind of.
Well, also this one really destroys the ambiguity because in this one it says outright that it's supernatural. You know what's causing Michael Myers to do what he does. Really does destroy sort of the mystique of the character.
Right, absolutely.
And it's pretty much. I consider it basically, it's a satanic cult movie that just happens to feature Michael Myers.
Exactly, I agree with that. It's almost like they shoehorned him into the movie.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and it's too bad, because a movie just about a satanic cult like that probably would have been a more compelling movie, you know, in some ways, you know.
And it's times like that where you wonder, maybe this should have stayed an anthology franchise.
Right, yeah,
That could be
great point.
Because if it was a different story every year, I mean, it could have been going even today. Like,
Yeah,
like Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
But I feel like with 6, it had like, I think it was a film that could have had potential, but they just did not know how to like structure the story, how to like really make it a good movie. That was the problem.
Was this the one with Paul Rudd?
Yes.
Yeah,
He,
okay.
he plays Tommy Doyle.
Right. Okay, yeah.
I thought he was okay. I mean, not
Right.
as good as the kid from the first. They wanted to bring back the kid, but he was no one could find him at the time. Nobody knew where he was.
Okay. And I thought it was cool that they were bringing Tommy Doyle. Like, that's a cool callback.
Yes,
to the,
that was
to the first
interesting.
movie, you know.
Paul Rudd said that he was really disappointed how like this turned out. He said he wanted to be a success, but he just was not happy, and that's how. But it's made like look where he is today. He's like one of 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up.
Yeah,
and,
right. He's a big comedic. It's interesting. He's a big like comedic actor.
Yeah, I
you
know.
He started out in that, in horror film.
There was also the producer's cut actually has a lot more character moments with Loomis, but the director Joe Chappelle hated Donald Pleasance
Really?
and
No, I don't know that.
did not like the Sam Loomis character, so he just cut scenes out of the original cut of the movie.
Really?
So Loomis has almost no character development in the theatrical cut, but they give him a lot of character moments in the producer's cut. And I want to point out, we mentioned before in Halloween 4 and 5, Loomis has a scar on his face from what happened at the end of 2. In part 6, he doesn't have those scars, and I remember as a little kid watching this movie being like, what the fuck happened to his scars?
He got plastic surgery in the meantime.
They actually say that in the producer's cut.
interesting.
Like, there's
okay.
a throwaway
wow.
line of
That's
dialogue where he says, "Oh yeah, I got plastic surgery."
Oh, interesting.
But they cut that out of the theatrical cut, and that filled in a major plot hole,
Yeah,
though.
just that one line, but yeah.
For what?
They really should have just released that because there was so much that was elucidated in that producer's cut that, like, the theatrical didn't talk shit about.
There's also, like, I remember in, there's a scene, and it's in both the producer's cut and the theatrical cut, where, like, Michael Myers kills this douchebag radio DJ, and then his body is hanging from a tree, and there's this stupid-ass scene where this little girl is underneath the flow of blood going, "Look, Mommy, it's raining red," and I'm just thinking, what the fuck is wrong with that girl?
Oh, God.
Seriously, little girls wouldn't act like that. A little girl, if they saw a dead body from a tree and blood coming down from it, most little girls would be like, "What the fuck is that?"
From what I've heard, I think the reason why when they released the original cut because like the original cut was not like a success when it came out. That they took like years to release the theatrical. I mean the producer's cut.
From what I heard, they it didn't do well in test screenings.
It didn't. No.
Right. And then it was released right. Scream Factory released it right in their Halloween box.
They did. It's on Blu-ray now.
Cool that they did that. Yeah.
I'm curious to check out this producer's cut because the last time I saw it was high school when I was like really getting into horror film because at that time I did not know that there were two cuts, original producer's cut. I'm like, wait a minute, like which film am I watching? It's just.
I do want to point out that in the movie you have members of the Strode family who move back into the Myers house, and I'm like, why the fuck would you want to do that? But I want to point out that the woman who plays the mother, the older mother in the film, is Sally from Don't Be Afraid of the Dark.
Oh, neat. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Kim Darby.
Yeah, Kim
Darby plays a role. Yep, absolutely.
She was also in the original True Grit.
Right. Yep.
And then, of course, like the reveal that Wynn is the Man in Black.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cool. That's another great throwback to the first one.
Right.
Especially since I think there's a line of dialogue in the first one where they're talking about how the fuck does Michael know how to drive? And
Right.
Loomis goes, somebody must have been giving him lessons. And he's talking to Wynn in that scene.
Right.
And Wynn must be the one. So
Right. That's great. Oh, that's a really good point. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting, like, sort of cyclical thing back to the first one. But it's as far as reveals go, I mean, like, I guess it could have been better. Because it had to be somebody, you know.
Yeah.
I love the ending of the producer's cut though. It's
Yeah.
Oh, I have a
up there with the ending from the fourth one. Because like, oh fuck, it's all gonna happen again. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
And now Loomis is like the one in charge.
And I want to point out the ending of the theatrical cut. It literally ends with you just see Michael Myers' mask on the ground, and you hear Loomis in the background going, "Eh!"
his last line. It's sad to hear that.
Yeah.
Oh, here. Oh,
That's
sorry.
why, see, that's why the producer's cut is better too. 'Cause, like, you actually like see Loomis for the last time, even though he's in like this place where he's gonna be very miserable. Like, he's like now he has to like propagate all this evil. But you know, as like an ending for Loomis, it works strangely well, particularly since the first one was all about like accepting your fate,
Right.
and stuff. And now, like after fighting it for all this time, now he's gonna have to like help it along.
Yeah.
It would have been really interesting to see them follow that up, but of course Donald Pleasance died afterwards.
Yeah.
I was listening to one podcast, and one guy made a joke that this movie killed him.
Who knows?
Surprised.
And isn't it alluded in the film that that the baby in the movie was produced between Michael Myers and
I said
Jamie?
that.
That's,
Yeah, right,
confirmed,
right.
that's
I-
confirmed in the producer's
Oh wow.
cut.
Okay.
I hated that so much that really frustrated me because when I first heard like who because in the original cut they don't explain who the father is. I think I like that more than like saying Michael Myers is the father and that really just
Yeah, that's kind of creepy.
I lost interest in that. It reminded me of what I saw in the remake of Black Christmas a little bit. Anyway, that's a different story.
Hey guys, thanks for watching that. Now that was part 1. Part 2 is coming very soon, and that will be me and my friends talking about Halloween H2O, Halloween Resurrection, and the 2 Rob Zombie Halloween movies. So stay tuned for part 2 of this Halloween retrospective, and bye.